Hi guys, and welcome back. I'm Clayton Pixton. You are listening to the Impressions of the Prophet podcast about Joseph Smith, and we are here with the one and only
Susan Easton Black. I don't know if one and only, but
believe me, you're the one and only. We're all one and onlys, right, Susan?
yeah, we're all one and onlys.
We're all special. Okay, so we're on to Nauvoo. Have we named it Nauvoo yet?
We haven't named it yet.
Okay, so it's Commerce still, technically.
Commerce
But
still.
it's, as of today, it's going to be Nauvoo. So I was listening, Susan, this week to a podcast, and I don't remember the name of it, but you were being interviewed by somebody. It can't have been that long ago. And you were talking about Emma Smith. And you had mentioned that your feelings about her had changed over time.
Right.
Is that right?
Oh, for sure.
Tell us a
say,
little about that.
When I was younger, and thought I was smart, right? I'm like, why wouldn't Emma go west? I mean, what's up with her? And, and then I got older and suddenly realized that, she was trying to make the best choice she could as she saw it for where she was at. And, with her kids not staying with the church, and I've experienced some of that. And, suddenly I think Emma's pretty great. And anyway, I think I'd be lucky to see her in the next life, actually.
I do too. And listening to that, I just wanted to, share that I had I felt my heart expand a little and maybe soften, and I feel a little guilty for maybe any judgment I that's had.
Great comment.
And so, I appreciated that. And anyway, I think that's the right direction to go. I think that feels right.
Leave the judgment in the hands of the Lord.
Definitely. Okay, well, I'm going to attempt, and I am going to fail to some degree, but I will attempt this song. This is Let Us Oft Speak Kind Words.
Very perfect.
Let us soft speak kind words to each other, at home or where'er we may be, like the warblings of birds on the heather. Their tones will be welcome and free. They'll gladden the heart that's repining, give courage and hope from above, and where the dark clouds hide the shining, let in the bright sunlight of love. Oh, the kind words we give shall in memory live, and sunshine forever impart. Let us soft speak kind words to each other. Kind words are sweet tones of the heart.
Oh, that was great. Has to be an original, right?
Yeah, original arrangement. So that's a hymn written by the same guy who wrote the text, who wrote a couple we've done here, The Iron Rod and Choose the Right.
Oh, big talent.
So and more. His name is Joseph Townsend. Huh. Yeah. And then the music was written by the same guy, Ebenezer Beasley. He ended up being the director of the Tabernacle Choir, same guy who wrote the music to High on the Mountain Top and 'Tis Sweet to Sing the Matchless Love, as well as many others. Yeah. Okay, well, with that, Susan, please take it away.
All right. Our topic tonight is going to be a beautiful Nauvoo. And as we left off, we had the saints in commerce. We know that Joseph Smith is actually going to be the architect of Nauvoo. And I like that. We think of Joseph as the prophet, and soon to be the mayor in the town. But tonight we're going to feature him as an architect. Well, kind of going back in time, we know that this area that we called Commerce was a pretty boggy marshland, especially close by the Mississippi River. But Joseph had a plan as the architect that he was going to make this town that he would create a light unto the world. And so try and imagine it wasn't just going to be a town, but it would be a light for the whole world to gaze upon. And so with that, when we think of Nauvoo jetting out as a peninsula, we need to think bigger because the land will now dramatically increase that Joseph's going to refer to as the light of the world. For many of us, we've been to the town of Nauvoo, and Commerce was renamed Nauvoo, meaning beautiful place, beautiful situation. And as most of us go there, we think, oh, it's a small, quaint agrarian community. Because what have we seen? We've seen the Scoville Bakery, and you see this little pop-up house, and actually the Scoville Bakery is a favorite, especially of young tourists. And they go in there and they receive molasses cookies, and most of the tourists then come in the summer. Little do they know that the cookies were made in December and frozen. But nevertheless, they seem pretty excited, and that's a big tourist attraction. But you see this little house, and you think, oh, Nauvoo couldn't be much. And then you go not quite across the street, and you see the old Jonathan Browning gun shop, where we learn that Jonathan Browning was the inventor of the repeating rifle. And you look at it and you think, this is interesting. It's a small, quaint community, a little bit like Williamsburg, as you see these many little kind of pop-up houses. But by the time you're visiting Joseph Smith's red brick store, you're starting to learn that there were 38 stores, like his general store in town. And suddenly you begin to realize that we're not just talking a small community that's on Water Street and Main Street in town, but much larger. When you eventually go to what was called the Mansion House, people back then used to name their houses like we name children and, dogs, cats kind of thing. But this is an example of Joseph's Mansion House that had additional wings going out both sides of it, so much larger. But then you stop and you look at the census reports. As you look at the census reports, you'd say, how could this really be a light unto the world? Because you'd say in 1860, there were a little bit over 1,000 people, and if you get all the way down to 2010, you're still about the same number. And if I had put up 2020, we'd find that, how are they doing? And actually losing population. And population closer now to 9, even 800 people. And you go, well, was there really a heyday for Nauvoo? Was there really a time when it appeared it would be a light unto the world? And the answer has everything to do with the prophet Joseph Smith. So tonight, as Clayton and I talk to you, I want everybody to think bigger than even what you may have seen as a tourist going to Nauvoo. Notice what Joseph wants to do. As he's now come into Commerce, he said, I consider it wisdom to make an attempt to really build up a city. He's not talking about a village or a town. He's talking about a full-fledged city. Now, to do so, one of the things that he will have done is to make sure that the city was divided into lots. And you're looking at pretty much 4-acre lots. And Joseph will now divide the city north, south, east, west. And it's like you're putting on a grid. All of you statistical people where you do all the grids and Excel spreadsheets, That's how Joseph then divided the town. Notice he begins to name the town after some of his favorite people. So it's not first south, second north, east, west kind of things, but he names the town for some of his closest friends. So there's Parley Street in honor of who, Clayton?
Parley P. Pratt.
Yeah. And then an Orson Hyde Street. Orson's featured here. Taylor Street, named for
John Taylor.
Perfect. And then James Mulholland was Joseph Smith's secretary. That's for him. And the last three that are shown here are named for Joseph's brothers, right? So Samuel Smith, Don Carlos Smith, Hiram Smith. And in addition to the names of the streets, we're going to find typical houses in town as Joseph starts out. First, you'd arrived and you put together some kind of log cabin. And log cabins, you always had a tar bucket next to it, and you'd fill in the holes where the logs didn't fit together, or sometimes you'd square the logs up. From a log cabin, they went to what they called clapboard houses. And from the clapboard house, you'd say, as they had eventually, some will then be able to obtain bricks, and they'll make brick houses. So housing was always, you're moving up. You're going from logs to clapboard houses like the mansion house to eventually, if life goes good for you, you're in some kind of brick home. Because the homes all had acreage around them, typically on any lot, you could find there was a garden. And the garden had fruit trees, vegetables being planted. And what it was the garden would then help sustain the family inside. And then you also had next to the home, you had the shops. So we've seen like Scoville Bakery was right next to the Scoville's home. The Jonathan Browning gun shop, well, the gun shop was actually attached to the home, and then with a garden around it. As we look farther, we realize then that all of Joseph's friends, including himself, they're all farmers. The goal of the 19th century was to be a farmer, but you may be on the side blacksmith, a gunsmith, a baker, or something else. So what would happen is that Nauvoo was the place you would live after your harvest was over. So you'd move into town probably late October, sometimes first part of October, and then you would head out to your farmhouse on the outskirts of town, starting right after April. So it's a most unusual town where you'd say you'd live close to neighbors, side by side with your shop, your barn, your house, your garden, and then you'd move out, or at least some of the family would move out into their farmhouses. Now with that, we then move forward and we find that if you start then baptizing several, and everyone you baptize is a farmer, then the question is, can you really all live in Nauvoo? And the answer is no. Nauvoo was like the hub of a wagon wheel with spoke communities going out. So when Joseph talks about making a city that would be a light unto the world, he's talking about a massive effort, not just Nauvoo, because you've got these spoke communities going out where people are saying, okay, we're going to have our town, but actually I wanted to live close by my farm. Therefore, I just want one house to care for, not two. As Joseph did so, his conclusion was that Nauvoo would be a stake then with these kind of spoke communities all attached to it. So you can see the beginning of Nauvoo to be a stake. It's in section 124, verse 2. This stake, which I have planted to be a cornerstone. And you can never have a weak cornerstone. The cornerstone of Zion, which shall be polished with refinement, which is after the similitude of a palace. And so as we look at this tonight, try and imagine a palace as we look at how large then this Nauvoo stake would become. Now, Nauvoo at that time, well, all of Illinois, and then other states also did the same thing, is that Nauvoo divided its landmass into what were called political wards. So I've had a house in Nauvoo. I was in the Nauvoo 2nd political ward, but I attended the Nauvoo 1st ward as it related to the Nauvoo stake. And so, as hard as you might try to find the word ward in scriptures, ward is something that now comes from Nauvoo and the political wards. As a result, these political wards in Nauvoo, as it starts out, there were originally 4, but with the number of saints moving into town, they eventually have 10 political wards. Now, in each ward, they had elections. So Joseph would call a bishop for the ward, and this is the first time that bishops have a specific geographic area. So you'll notice Newell K. Whitney, Edward Partridge, they were like bishops at large, and they had no geographic confinement. But once you look at Nauvoo, you have political wards where you have bishops, eventually 10 bishops, that have a geographical area that they are over.
So the modern conception of a ward comes from these political wards, which were originally for not ecclesiastical, but civic.
It's a civic kind of
political.
thing. So, for example, in your civic ward, at that time you'd be in the Nauvoo 1st ward of the Nauvoo stake, right? But in the Nauvoo political 1st ward, you would then select councilman, city councilman, to represent you. You'd also select, which men would volunteer to be part of the Nauvoo police to protect your ward. You would elect a justice of the peace from your ward, a geographic neighborhood. And then the bishop would call ward teachers, which today, it's gone through many different names, but home teachers, and now we call them ministers. But all of this is then traced to Nauvoo.
So at that time it was political and ecclesiastical.
Political and ecclesiastical.
And the word ward comes from
the
politics,
political part.
basically. Yeah.
Right. So Joseph, the bishop's called by the prophet. The bishop then calls the ward teachers. From that group, you have an election in your ward for the city councilman, a justice of the peace. And so there are many justices of the peace in Nauvoo. And then a certain number of men would say, yep, I can be part of the police force, with an emphasis of especially protecting, this geographic area. Okay, perfect. Well, in the meantime, you can imagine our missionaries are out there in those 26 states, but missionaries are now, including the Quorum of the 12, they've gone off to England. They've baptized hundreds, eventually thousands. And wherever the missionaries have gone, their message is not only the message of the restoration, but you need to gather where the saints are. In other words, the message then goes across the Atlantic Ocean to England that says, gather to Nauvoo. The message is now in Virginia and South Carolina, Tennessee, and the message is, gather to Nauvoo. So what will happen, you'd say the first saints to settle in Nauvoo will be those that have gone through the extermination order in Missouri. Some of them have been part of the church in Palmyra, Kirtland, Missouri, and now Illinois. And obviously, they have the first choice of lots as they move into Nauvoo. And so the question is, well, what do you do with the people that are just arriving from England and from Scotland and Wales and Ireland? And where did they go? And Nauvoo becomes the check-in place where they are then told, go settle in the following areas, which are close to Nauvoo, and become a farmer. So it's much like Salt Lake. There was a time you would check in Salt Lake, and then you'd receive an assignment. We want you in Taylorsville. We want you in Willard. We want you in Provo. And where did that begin? It begins in Nauvoo.
And it would be an assignment. It wouldn't be, hey, you have the choice of these places. It would be more like, we need you to go
Yeah,
here.
it was more like, we need you. And you start to see certain groups, they're more English in that town than others. But okay, as they check in, we then look and we'd say, what do we now have besides the 4 and then 10 wards in Nauvoo? We have branches that are attached to wards. And you see pretty similar today. But the branches now have moved out from Nauvoo, and in some cases, far out. So, for example, we then look at, say, Adams County, where Quincy was. You'd say, do we have branches then attached to the Nauvoo stake? And I'd say, oh, sure. Just putting up a few examples, but we have them in a little town called Columbus, and in Freedom, and in Lima, and in Payson, and also in Quincy. If you were to look at Pike County, you'd say, well, here are people that have just arrived in Nauvoo. They've checked in. Where have they gone? They're in what we call today Pike County. They're in Burton. They're in Liberty. They're in a place called Mormontown. They're in Perry. They're in Union. And then you look and you'd say, well, what about Hancock County? And if you look, you're like 3, 6,
This is
8,
the
60,
county that Nauvoo is in?
that
Same
Nauvoo
county?
is in.
Okay.
And so you're looking at 19 small communities are being founded actually pretty close to Nauvoo. They're all within about 30 miles or so. But, we've got branches even at Carthage, Fountain Green, Ramus. Ramus, we actually built our very first ward meeting house. So before that time, saints would meet in groves, in valleys. There was never a church, although there were, well, in the case, Kirtland Temple, right? And they would meet in Newell K. Whitney's store also.
But not a dedicated building
Yeah.
just for meeting for
Right,
church.
but to have your very first meeting house that represented a branch will be in Ramus. But you get the idea that the saints are now making a city that will be a light unto the world, and they are filling in Hancock County and partially then in Pike County and Adams. And then if you look across the river, we're going to see they're also in Lee County there over in Iowa, which is directly across from Nauvoo. So you look there and you've got, 10, 11, 12 different communities where there are branches of the church, each branch then tied to a ward in Nauvoo, and then all the wards and branches formed what was called the Nauvoo stake. Now, at one point, we had a Zarahemla stake, but disbanded with the idea we're all part of the Nauvoo stake. Okay. Are you thinking big? We're thinking big.
So
then
has it got, we always hear how it rivaled Chicago in size and everything.
Right.
Is it at that point yet?
So
or?
you couldn't say Nauvoo at that point rivals Chicago in size, but if you were to take all the little settlements, and I'd say, oh yeah, they're getting pretty big, but we don't rival Chicago in size until after the death of Joseph Smith, when Brigham Young is saying, collapse all those communities and come into Nauvoo for safety and build the temple. So it's the collapsing that suddenly people are coming in from Yelrome and Ramus and across the river. When they come in, that's when it is. So the question is, as these little communities get underway, what are the reasons then you would come to Nauvoo? It's kind of like when I was a kid, why would you go to Salt Lake? And you'd say, oh, well, here's the reasons. So reasons, why would you come? And obviously a big one is they would come in for general conference. And then they would hold huge meetings. Thousands and thousands of people would then meet in what were called the various groves there in Nauvoo to listen to the words of the prophet. And you get that same kind of idea today. You'd say all of us kind of stop what we're doing, and even though we may be staying at home, we can watch on TV or on some kind of electronic device. You'd say we all gather in some sense for general conference. So general conference brings everybody in. And
What about was the population of the church at this time, would you say?
Well, you're starting to look at, 11,000 going on to eventually 20,000 are going to be in these little communities, when you pull it all together. But what is so interesting is that by the time of Nauvoo, we used to hold conferences. It was just kind of like, hey, okay, let's hold a conference. We held a conference in June. We held them in September. We have conferences held, other times. But when did general conferences become April and October? It's Nauvoo. So notice what we're learning about Nauvoo. We're learning we get wards in Nauvoo. We get geographic. We get branches tied to wards. We get general conference held in April and in October. And you'd say, what does that have to do? And you'd say, notice planting season. Once you attend conference, great, you're ready to move to your farmhouse and you're ready to plant, right? Or once you've got your harvest in and now you're ready to listen and we're coming back to town. So it has a lot to do with planting. It also had a lot to do with parading, which we'll get to, that has a military component. So general conference, one reason to come to Nauvoo. Another reason to come to Nauvoo is that's where you buried your dead. And notice last time we talked about baptisms for the dead and how important it was that Joseph would speak at funerals. So Mondays and Thursdays were the days that they would bury the dead. And if you're living way across the river, you're literally going to put your dead on a barge, you're going to bring it across, and you're going to bury it with the saints. And so going into any cemetery in Nauvoo that's an old cemetery, there's such a feeling, because even though somebody may have died out in Ramus or Golden Point, they're way out there, they're down by Bear Creek, you'd say you'd bring your bodies in because you want them to be in the central place of their Zion type of communities. Okay. Another reason to come to town was the Nauvoo Temple. And you'd say some people are called to work on that temple, which we'll talk about another point. But all those communities were expected to provide something for the temple. And many of them will come in with their harvest to provide food for the workers. And so whether it's wood, coming down, lumber coming from Wisconsin, there was an expectation that that temple is for all of us. And eventually, as the endowment is given, you get what we had talked about, the collapsing of communities, and they're all in trying to finish that temple so they can receive the blessings of the Lord. Okay, you'd say, what's another reason to come in? And the answer is to shop. So if you were to look at all of these communities that are being set up, the community that had the most stores kind of self-independent was Yellowroom, and the total number of stores they had was 4. And so you'd say, you know what I'm going to do? We're going to head to Nauvoo and we're going to shop, because that's what we do in Nauvoo. We go to general conference, we bury our dead, and we now come into the big city to shop. In Nauvoo at that time, they had business districts. There were 4, and you can see the business districts today. When you look at these little places like this, again, is a Scoville Bakery. But you can see there's Mulholland Street, Main Street, Parley Street, Water Street. Now, I'm not much of a shopper, but I'm sure that I would have hit all those streets looking for the best deal. Now, when they shopped, obviously the shop owner is hoping you'll pay cash. But for the most part, it's a trade. I'll cut your hair. I need the following items. Back then, we look today. If you ever want to find the men when you go shopping, you look in the middle of the mall where there are seats, and you'd say, where are the women? They're in the stores. In Nauvoo, men shopped. And the reason is because they're going to barter. And so you'd come in and you'd say, I've got a pig. I've dressed the pig. I want to be able to purchase shoes, da-da-da-da. And then you would barter with the person. And in essence, the man might have a meat store, but by the end of the day, he's got all kinds of stuff that he can sell the next day that have nothing to do with meat because you trade services. I'll watch your kids, and I think we've all kind of done this, babysitting or whatever. We trade, and what they ran on was short credit, long credit. My wife needs a pen. Harvest time is coming in. I can bring in X number of whatever it is. Can you give me short credit? And the better known you were by the businessman, he's willing to do long credit, meaning your credit can go for months and months until you pay me. You would also come into town because you needed services. So services are such things as medical. If we were to look, and you'd look at the medical people in Nauvoo, you'd say there were 12 dentists. So try and imagine if you lived in Yellowrome, you'd go, oh, that's pretty good. We've got 4 stores, but I need a dentist. I'm heading to Nauvoo. And if you needed a midwife, you're going to head to Nauvoo because you've got 12 and you've got doctors. So one of my favorite stories goes to Willard Richards, who was a doctor of sorts. He attended just for a few weeks a Thompsonian medical school. The medical school did not pronounce Willard Richards a doctor, but he announced that he was a doctor. And so at one point, a man came to Willard Richards and he needed his leg cut off. And Willard Richards cut off his leg and charged the man $50.50. And the man said, no, he's so used to bartering, right? And he said, I'm just going to give you $50. And Willard said, no, my price is $50.50. And the man said, well, why is that? And he said, well, I charged you 50 cents because I cut off your leg, but I'm charging you $50 because I knew how to do it. And so, so you'd say you'd come into town then for services. You couldn't get out in these little communities. Another reason that you'd come, you'd say, what other services could you find? Wow, you want to build now a brick house out in your far-flung community? We've got architects. You're fighting with your neighbor. We've got attorneys. We've got 20 boot makers. We've got 12 drugstores. We've got 38 dry goods and grocery stores. In addition, you'd say there are 11 hotels in Nauvoo. Now, try and imagine, how's Nauvoo becoming? And I go, it's a light unto the world. You don't just get the Latter-day Saints that are coming from these little towns. People are talking about Nauvoo will soon rival St. Louis for not only people, but accommodations. You've got mills, you've got stone quarries, you've got 9 steamboats regularly are stopping by. You've got 24 tailors. So are you getting the idea? It's a whole bunch bigger than you see when you go to visit. Now, the oddest thing about Nauvoo, with the services, with the accommodations, with the businesses, there are no banks in town. And you go, well, how can that be? Where's the ATM? ATM, where's your, we know something about credit cards, long and short credit, right? But no banks. And the reason for no banks is nobody trusts the banks now in Illinois. They had the 1837 run on the banks, everything crashed. They had a state run on the banks in 39. So when Joseph is setting up the town, no banks in town.
Is it partly because of the Safety Society or not
Yeah,
so
Safety
much?
Society had also effect for the Latter-day Saints. And so barter was everything. The man was a shopper. You could also find in Nauvoo refinement. You'll like this, Clayton. They actually had a music hall that could seat 600 people. And
Wow.
they had soloists in town. They had a cultural hall, we call it now, where you'd say they put on plays. Their biggest kind of social thing, they did dances. And notice what we're talking about. We're talking about the age of the people. Recall the average Latter-day Saint was in his 20s. I'm not sure dances would work with my group. Music hall, yep, we'd probably go for that. And some of the others, but they had dances. And when in doubt, they loved parades. And so you can even find some poetry saying, why would you go to Rome or Athens when you could go to Nauvoo and literally get the best of the best of some kind of cultural outlet then for these farmers. Okay, in addition, in Nauvoo, that's where there was education. They had common schools. Male teachers got more money than female teachers for doing the same job. Obviously, I don't like that. You could have private schools where you could teach, music. They actually had a seminary that's like a junior high school, and eventually the University of the City of Nauvoo with Orson Pratt. He's your best professor. He could teach almost anything. But you get Sidney Rigdon and others. So a lot of people say as they set up this university that it was a precursor to the university systems that were ultimately set up in Utah and now elsewhere by the church. So you've got, if you want your kids to go to school, wow, you make sure in the winter months you have a reason to be in Nauvoo or you know somebody that will house you. Also, every city, every man 18 to 45 needed to be part of some kind of militia so that the United States could call on them. It's like their National Guard to some extent. But every man 18 to 45, they weren't in a militia unit over there in Iowa. You'd say they all belonged to the Nauvoo Legion.
That you said they needed to be like they were required to be?
Yeah, 18 to 45. It was kind of like now we need to have our young kids, sign up. We don't have a draft, but back then it was expected able-bodied men were part of the Nauvoo Legion. Some accounts will say it got as big as 2,000 men. Other accounts will kind of get it larger up to 5,000 men. And Joseph Smith will be the lieutenant general then of the Nauvoo Legion, which was reported to be the largest, and perhaps not, but reported to be the largest then militia unit in a city. They also formed business associations. So today, you hear about the truckers have theirs and the steel workers have theirs. I just wanted to get the idea of the business association. Notice for the first time, you begin to see the beehive and representing industry. And the plan was not to have a business association where you competed against each other, but you taught each other. So, for example, a missionary that went out to, say, South Carolina and came back, he was expected to come back having not only spread the gospel, but learned a new trade. And then, where you see the missionaries stand and they talk about their mission, he would then share what he had learned so that they could make better products in Nauvoo.
Bring the knowledge.
Yeah, bring the knowledge back.
Community.
So if you were to look and to see what kind of business associations? Well, we have one for the bricklayers, the stonelayers, okay, do you see this? We have the coopers, the barrel makers get together, coaches and carriages, boots and shoes. And you'd say, well, wait a minute, don't you want to sell yours where you're at? And the answer was, yeah, you could sell it to your friends and so forth. But our plan is we're sending what we have made downriver. In other words, the plan was we are sending downriver. It will be the latest fashion, whether you're talking pottery, tailors. The big field had to do with agriculture.
What do you mean by downriver? Do you mean to Nauvoo or something else?
Downriver, say to St. Louis. You'd send it down the Mississippi, and even plans to send their wares to New Orleans and perhaps, from there, many other places. But you get this, not necessarily competing, but sharing with each other so we can make better products that we can compete with those beyond the confines of Nauvoo. Now, of all the organizations, there's only one organization of these business people that got together that was composed only of women. All the other organizations were male organizations. The one that was composed of women was called the Straw Hat Association. And in many respects, it's a precursor of Relief Society. And the women would get together and they would share how they could make, better looking straw hats with the idea we'll send them downriver. And once you get this kind of organized setup, it was easy for the women to say, yeah, we'd like to be organized where we are under the priesthood. And now we're going to do more humanitarian as opposed to the making money in this Straw Hat Association. So what have we learned tonight? We've learned that Joseph Smith, when you think of him as an architect, think expansion. He's not just looking at this small peninsula that juts out in the Mississippi. He's not just going to make Nauvoo great, but he's founded literally dozens of communities. And all of this in a very short period within a couple of years. So I hope our listeners tonight have enjoyed learning about Nauvoo the Beautiful. And I hope they'll have a chance to go visit. And when they go visit, say, hey, it all looks pretty great, but you want to know how Nauvoo really was? It's spread out.
It was nothing like this. It was
right. And it was, bustling. Nauvoo is still the cornerstone stake, and, it's got to be strong. And at one point, it really was. But with the death of Joseph and then the decision that the saints are going west, Nauvoo, in essence, has not risen up to what it once was during the days of Joseph Smith.
Joseph Smith had to be thinking of the New Jerusalem still. What would you say, from what you know? Do you think he figured this is where they were going to be for a good time, or do you still partly had a view of?
Yeah, I think he's always thinking as we get into talking about Joseph Smith running for president. I mean, he's even going to write to the men that were running for president of the United States, and his only question will be, what would you do to get us our land back in Jackson County? So I see Joseph amazingly inspired, amazingly brilliant, and the saints coming and literally buying into his plan to make this entire area a light unto the world. And you could see economically, imagine how jealous, the people in Warsaw and Carthage would be as this little nowhere commerce is rising up. In fact, at one point, as the time comes and goes, Nauvoo had become so amazing in the United States. They were talking about, the United States will go from sea to shining sea. We're going to go from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And the question is, we need to relocate Washington, D.C. And the question is, where should we put it so we're more middle America, that we could more easily get from sea to shining sea and people coming in. And one of the places they considered was Nauvoo, Illinois. And you look and you go, well, why would you consider it? Well, look what we've talked about today. Think bigger.
You can imagine without impediment, what the saints could achieve, right? Had they not, I guess, been persecuted and kicked out from place to place, but also had they maybe been unified and, all the way.
Yeah, what they could have done. But then you look at what happened to Utah. And Brigham Young, a state of Deseret, within a few years, he's got places all through Utah, Arizona, part into Colorado, out into California and so forth. And so you can see that what Joseph did, precursor, perhaps even teaching Brigham Young, you can do this.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks, Susan.
Thank you.
All right. Susan, you've written some biographies of some people. Was your book on Emma, was that a biography?
Right.
Or okay, and Alexander Donovan, we talked about
Three Witnesses.
Each
I
of
wrote
the three
a book
witnesses.
on President
Ballard.
President Ballard. Anyway, I like people, Clayton. I like you. And, I just, I don't know. I just love history. I just think there's so much to learn from the past.
And who's writing your biography?
Well, nobody's jumped forward. Maybe somebody in our listening audience. I don't know.
If nobody comes forward and nobody, better qualified.
Is that going to be you?
Don't forget about me, okay?
Okay.
I'm throwing my hat in right now.
Okay.
All right. She didn't jump for it, guys. I think she must know some better people, but that's
No.
okay. All right, so this hymn, I'll end with this again. So, let us oft speak kind words. And my dad used one of the many hymns that I learned from my father singing to us as kids spontaneously from the kitchen as we, for sure, were, just speaking so kindly to each other that he was inspired to sing along. Let us oft speak kind words. Like the sunbeam of morn on the mountains, the soul they awake to good cheer. Like the murmur of cool, pleasant fountains, they fall in sweet cadences near. Let soft then in kindly tone voices our mutual friendship renew, till heart meets with heart and rejoices in friendship that ever is true. Oh, the kind words we give shall in memory live, and sunshine forever impart. Let us oft speak kind words to each other. Kind words are sweet tones of the heart. All right, there you go, guys. Thanks for joining us as always, and we'll be back next time to continue on this story. Thanks for joining us. And last words from you, Susan.
Well, Clayton, that was fabulous.
Thank you.
You're an amazing arranger. And
that is one. Sorry to interrupt you. I asked you to talk, and then I'm interrupted. But that happens to be the second most listened to track of my hymn CD after, what is it? Teach Me to Walk in the Light. But yeah, and my sister sings harmony. It actually says it's one of my favorite too. But okay, now that I've said that. Go ahead, sorry.
I like that. Anyway, thanks everybody for listening.
All right. I'll see you guys later.